A woman was crying alone on a park bench until a millionaire sat beside her and asked just one question. No one noticed when Claire Morales sat down on that park bench, her scarf clumsily wrapped around her neck, her soul curled inward like damp paper. It was one of those days when the world kept spinning, but for her, everything felt frozen. Dry leaves circled her feet, as if trying to hug her. But even autumn couldn't comfort her sorrow. She had been wandering for hours with no direction. The eviction notice still crumpled in her coat pocket, her hands cold, and her heart colder. The sounds of the outside world blurred into a distant bird song and the gentle splash of the nearby fountain. She wasn't crying loudly. She cried like someone who had stopped hoping to be seen. Swollen eyes, sealed lips, and a quiet, aching soul. Beside her, the bench had room for someone else, but she wasn't expecting company, until she heard it. What would you do if no one were watching? The voice was deep, calm, without urgency. Claire turned her head slowly, as if waking from a long sleep. A man, maybe early 40s, wearing a suit but nothing flashy, looked at her. Not with pity, but with genuine interest. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between nostalgia and quiet resolve. She didn't answer, just lowered her gaze, afraid that her tears might betray more than sadness. He didn't press, he simply remained seated beside her, staring forward, as if the bench had always belonged to them both. He didn't ask her name, didn't offer comfort, just that strange question, one that, unknowingly, had cracked open a door Claire hadn't dared cross in years, the door to imagining herself free. Minutes passed, maybe 15, maybe 20, neither moved. Children laughed in the distance, a dog chased a pigeon across the grass, but for them, the world had collapsed into a small wooden bench, two strangers, and a question hanging in the air. Claire thought of all she had lost, her teaching job at a school that shut down overnight, her small but memory-filled apartment, and the final message from her fiancé, who had ended their engagement just a week earlier, with surgical coldness. Everything had unraveled at once. She wasn't mourning a single loss, she was crumbling under the weight of everyone. The man beside her, Andrew Salver, didn't check his phone, didn't fidget. He stared at a fixed point on the horizon, elbows on knees, hands loosely clasped. He seemed deeply familiar with silence, like someone who had lived in it for years. Claire noticed the worn edges of his shoes, which didn't match the rest of his polished outfit. No rings, no flashy watch. There was something purposefully neutral about him. At last, she broke the silence. "And you?" she asked quietly. "What would you do if no one were watching?" Andrew turned his head slowly. He smiled, not sarcastically, not sadly, just softly. He didn't answer right away. Then finally he said, "Exactly what I'm doing right now." That simple, honest sentence disarmed her. For the first time in days, Claire laughed, just a small laugh, shy, almost hesitant, but real. And in that small crack in her sadness, something managed to slip in air, a breath, a beginning. He didn't introduce himself. She didn't either. It was as if they shared an unspoken agreement. Names could wait. That moment didn't need definitions. When Andrew stood up, he did so calmly. He left a neatly folded napkin on the bench beside her. No words, no farewell. Claire picked it up slowly, cautiously. Inside, there was no money, just a handwritten address, and one question: would you talk to me again, if one day you needed to? It wasn't an invitation, it was a possibility. She remained alone on the bench once more, but something inside her had shifted. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely invisible. Over the following days, Claire thought about throwing the napkin away more than once. First she tucked it into the pocket of her coat, then into an old notebook, and finally, between the pages of her favorite book, as if trying to hide it even from herself. She didn't understand why she couldn't let go of something so simple. It wasn't a promise, it wasn't a gift, it wasn't even a plan, just an address, and a question. Life, meanwhile, offered no mercy. The public school she'd applied to rejected her. The bank sent a final eviction notice. The neighbor who used to knock for coffee stopped knocking. Claire began to feel that it wasn't just her job she'd lost, it was her place in the world, as if somehow, she had become unnecessary. But one thing held her back from giving up entirely. Her mother, long gone, used to say, "People don't cross our paths by accident. The smallest gestures can change everything." That phrase returned to Claire, night after night, as she stared at the folded napkin resting on her nightstand like a ghost waiting to speak. Then came a rainy afternoon. Water leaked through the old window panes, and bills seemed to multiply like shadows. Claire, no longer moved by courage, but by sheer exhaustion, made a choice. She didn't expect miracles. She just needed to talk to someone who didn't remind her of everything she'd lost. She put on a worn coat, grabbed a broken umbrella, and stepped outside with uncertain steps. The address led her to a quiet, upper-class neighborhood, elegant but understated. Old houses with sculpted gardens, heavy doors, and warm light hiding behind thick curtains. It wasn't flashy, but the difference was clear. She stopped in front of the number on the napkin. It was a 2-story house with a black iron gate and tall trees that partly obscured the front. Claire hesitated. She could have turned around. She could have pretended she got the address wrong. But she didn't. She rang the bell once, and waited. When the door opened, it wasn't Andrew. It was a woman in her 50s, wearing a plain uniform, and a sharp, assessing look. She eyed Claire carefully. "Can I help you?" Claire swallowed hard. She was about to say no, that it was a mistake, that she was leaving. But then, as if the words had been waiting for the right moment, she whispered, "He gave me this address. I just want to talk." The woman's expression shifted ever so slightly. She didn't ask her name. She simply said, "Wait here," and closed the door. Claire stood in the rain, shaking, not from the cold, but from uncertainty. The minutes stretched. Rain soaked her shoulders. She stood there without an umbrella, arms wrapped around herself, trying not to think of the most likely truth, that the woman wouldn't come back, that Andrew wouldn't remember her, that to someone like him, she probably meant nothing. But then, the door opened again, and there he was. No coat, no tie, none of the sharp polish from the park, just a man in a soft gray sweater and dark pants. He looked different, lighter somehow, but also more human. They stood there for a few seconds, facing each other in silence. He was the first to speak. "I didn't think you'd come." Claire lowered her gaze, embarrassed. She was about to apologize, for showing up unannounced, for being soaked, for everything. But Andrew gently raised a hand, stopping her. "Come in. There's hot tea." It wasn't an offer loaded with subtext. It was almost hospitable, like someone welcoming a soul who'd been out in the storm for far too long. The house was unexpectedly warm. Books lined the walls. Modern art clashed beautifully with old photographs. The air smelled faintly of wood and lemon. Claire had expected something colder, distant, sterile. But this place breathed with memory. She sat on a leather armchair near the fireplace, while Andrew disappeared through a side door. He returned with 2 mugs. They didn't speak, not yet, but the silence between them had changed. It was no longer uncomfortable. It was thick, weighty, full of meanings neither dared say aloud. Finally, he broke through the invisible fog. "What did you lose?" Claire took her time answering, not because she didn't know, but because no one had asked her like that, without judgment. "Everything, I think," she whispered. Andrew nodded, slowly, as if he didn't need the details to understand. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find out what's truly yours. And at that moment, for the first time, Claire looked at him differently. Not as a polished stranger, not as a man in a tailored suit, but as someone who had also lost something, maybe a lot. That night, there were no confessions, no dramatic backstories, but there was a truce, a silent treaty between 2 people who didn't know each other, but who shared the same open wound, emptiness. When she finally left, hours later, Claire wasn't necessarily happier, but something inside her had shifted, like someone had touched the most fragile part of her, gently. In the weeks that followed, Claire returned to that house more than once. At first, timidly. Later, with a kind of natural rhythm she couldn't explain. She was never formally invited, but every time she knocked, the door opened. Andrew always seemed to be expecting her, though he never said so. Sometimes they talked, sometimes he read, while she stared quietly out the window. There was no pressure, no questions, just presence. And somehow, that felt more meaningful than any promise. It was on a Tuesday afternoon that she first heard it. A soft melody, floating down from the second floor. A piano, slightly out of tune, but haunting and sweet, playing something close to a waltz. Claire looked up, curious. "Who's playing?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "My niece," Andrew replied. "She's been living here for about a year." Claire blinked. He had never mentioned a niece before. Andrew had always been reserved, almost sealed shut, when it came to personal matters. No mention of a partner, no children, no family. But that afternoon, something shifted. The dining room door creaked open, and there she was, a girl, maybe 10 years old, stood in the doorway. Dark hair in 2 tight braids, eyes too large for her face, the kind of eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "This is Lucy," Andrew said. "Lucy, this is Claire." The girl said nothing. She studied Claire for a moment, calm, cautious. Then without a word, she turned and walked out into the garden. Andrew watched her go. "She's special, quiet, hasn't spoken much since her mother disappeared." Claire froze, not because of what he said, but how he said it. Disappeared wasn't the same as died. It was a word that echoed, a word with shadows, and Claire didn't miss it. He never called the woman his sister. He offered no details, just silence. That day, as Claire was getting ready to leave, Andrew offered her something more than the usual silence. He made a request, soft, almost like a suggestion. "Would you help her with her schoolwork? She's bright, but she's starting to shut the world out." Claire hesitated. She wasn't sure she had anything left to give. How could someone so broken help someone else heal? But Lucy's gaze from the garden, so much like her own, when she sat crying on that park bench, gave her the answer. "I'll try," she said. And just like that, without knowing it, she took the first step into a bond that would transform not only her life, but the life of a little girl, wounded by a past full of shadows, and toward truths Andrew had tried, for too long, to keep buried. Claire began visiting the house more frequently. At first, it was just to help with homework, but soon, it became a rhythm, a ritual. Every afternoon, Lucy waited for her. Colored pencils lined up perfectly on the table, as if the neatness gave her control over a world that had become unsteady. Lucy didn't speak much. She answered in nods, single words, or quiet gestures. But Claire noticed something strange, something powerful. Lucy spoke through her drawings, page after page, scene after scene, all filled with symbols. A faceless man standing at a closed door, a woman with long hair, always drawn from behind, a small child, watching from a corner. The images were innocent in style, but heavy with feeling. It was grief rendered in crayon. Then one afternoon, as they worked on math problems, Lucy slid a new page across the table. Claire froze. This one was of her. She was sitting on a park bench, eyes full of tears. Beside her, Andrew. The scene was exact, precise, and impossible for Lucy to know. Claire swallowed hard, unsettled. "How did you know?" Lucy didn't respond. She just lowered her head, as if she regretted showing too much. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. Andrew's house no longer felt just warm. There was something else beneath the surface, something left unsaid, something watching. She began to suspect what she hadn't dared question before. Maybe her meeting with Andrew hadn't been random at all. The next morning, Claire returned to the house unannounced. Andrew didn't seem surprised. He was in the library, flipping through a worn leather-bound book. Without looking up, he asked, "She showed you the drawings?" Claire nodded. "What do they mean?" He closed the book slowly, took a moment, and then said, "Lucy remembers things we adults try hard to forget. She keeps them differently, in her own way." Claire stepped closer. "But why did she draw me?" This time Andrew looked her straight in the eye. Because you're part of it. Even if you don't know it yet. Claire felt the floor shift beneath her. Who was Andrew? Why would a traumatized little girl draw her crying in a park, before ever meeting her? And what secrets were hiding behind the quiet doors of this perfect silent house? Instead of leaving, Claire sat down in the same armchair as always. She knew the answers wouldn't come right away. But she also knew, she was in too deep now to walk away. And for the first time, she realized, the pain that had led her to that park bench might not have been hers alone. The garden behind Andrew's house had something strange about it. It wasn't particularly large, but every corner seemed intentionally designed to hide, not reveal. A path of pale stones wound between tall hedges, overgrown rose bushes, and a pergola covered in dry wisteria vines. And at the very back, a locked greenhouse, long abandoned, covered in dust and silence. Lucy often wandered the garden in bare feet, saying nothing. She would pause in front of the greenhouse, and simply stare, never going in. Claire would watch her from the window, quietly. The girl never touched the door, never turned the handle, just stood still, as if the glass building whispered something only she could hear. One day, Claire stepped outside. She needed air, to breathe, to think, to escape the spiral her life had become. Since meeting Andrew and Lucy, she walked to the pergola, and sat on a rusted iron bench. Lucy joined her minutes later, silent as always, a piece of paper in hand. She laid it gently on the bench beside Claire, and walked away without a word, never looking back. It was another drawing, but this time, it was of the greenhouse, and it wasn't empty. Inside there was a woman, her features vague, but clearly feminine, holding a withered flower. In front of her stood a crying little girl, and at the bottom of the page, written in trembling letters, Alicia. Claire felt a sharp pull in her chest. That name had never been mentioned. Not by Andrew. Not by Lucy. Not by anyone. She held the paper like it burned her fingers. That night, she asked, "Who's Alicia?" She spoke softly, watching Andrew pour wine in the kitchen. He froze, not dramatically, but deeply, like someone who hears distant thunder and instantly recognizes the storm. "Alicia was my sister," he said at last. Was. Claire didn't miss the past tense. She didn't interrupt. Andrew set the bottle down slowly, eyes fixed on nothing. One day she just didn't come back.
She left this house without taking anything.
No clothes, no documents, no note.
She just vanished.
He leaned against the counter, as if the words had taken the strength from his legs.
The police found nothing.
Some think she left by choice. Others, that something else happened.
I never knew.
And Lucy, well, she remembers things no one believes. Claire felt the story sink deep into her skin, not just because of the tragedy, but because she had been pulled into it without ever asking. Why her? Why had Andrew let her into this broken world? And what does that have to do with me?
Her voice cracked.
Andrew didn't answer right away. He just looked at her. And in his eyes was a mix of pain and something else. Recognition. Because Alicia knew you. The room spun around her. Alicia knew you. That sentence hit like a hammer. Claire's mouth opened, but no words came. She wanted to ask how, when, why, but there wasn't enough air in the room for all those questions. "I don't understand," Claire whispered. Andrew walked to the far end of the room, toward the tallest bookshelf. He pulled down a worn wooden box, the kind that felt like it held more than just papers. He placed it on the table with quiet care, like something fragile rested inside. "I found this among her things after she disappeared," he said. "But it wasn't until I saw you crying on that bench that I realized." He opened the box. Inside, letters, all handwritten, some opened, others still sealed. Each envelope addressed to a different woman. But one caught Claire's eye immediately. Claire Morales. She forgot how to breathe. "What is this?" "I'm not sure." Andrew admitted. I never opened it. I didn't want to violate something I didn't understand. But, I think it's yours. Claire's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. Its yellowed paper felt like it had been waiting for years. She opened it carefully, as if tearing more than just paper. Inside was a single sheet, written in blue ink, the handwriting small, but steady. Dear Claire, I know this may seem strange, maybe even impossible, but if this letter ever reaches you, then fate has done its part. We only met for a short time, but I never forgot what you told me that afternoon at the station. You said small acts can change everything. And they did. Your words made me stay. They gave me hope, but they also showed me truths I couldn't ignore. Claire sat down. Her mind was pulled into a memory she thought was long gone. Yes, there had been a woman at a train station, years ago, nervous, shaking, alone. They spoke for just a few minutes. Claire helped her make a difficult decision. She never knew the woman's name. It was her, Claire murmured. I met Alicia once. I thought she was just a stranger. Andrew nodded, his eyes fixed on the letter. I don't believe in coincidences, he said. But she did. She used to say that the people who show up without warning bring the missing pieces. Claire didn't read the rest of the letter aloud. It was too personal, too heavy, but one line hit her like a punch to the chest. If one day I disappear, it won't be out of fear. It will be to protect someone I love. The ink in that sentence looked darker, as if written by the steady hand of someone who had already made an irreversible decision. Claire closed her eyes. She didn't know if she was getting closer to the truth, or falling deeper into a story that was never hers, but now refused to let her go. Outside, in the garden, Lucy was drawing again, but this time it wasn't flowers or faceless men. She drew a flower, and from its stem, it bled. Claire didn't go home that night. She stayed in the guest room Andrew offered her, lying flat on her back, staring at the ceiling, the letter from Alicia beside her, still whispering, if one day I disappear, it won't be out of fear. Then why didn't she ever return? Why did she leave Lucy behind? The next morning, the house was quieter than usual. Lucy didn't appear for breakfast. Andrew seemed tense, shoulders tighter, eyes avoiding hers. Claire didn't press. She took her coffee and wandered into the garden. There, under the pergola, sat Lucy, same sketchbook on her lap, same silence. But today, something was different. She had drawn faces, men, one with a beard, another with a scar across his cheek. Their eyes were hollow, shadowed, and in the bottom corner, a tiny figure of a woman, surrounded by these dark shapes. It was the first time Lucy had ever drawn fear. Claire crouched down slowly. Who are they? She asked softly. Lucy didn't answer. She simply raised her hand and pointed to the greenhouse, that quiet place no one ever touched. That night, after tucking Lucy into bed, Claire found Andrew sitting alone in the living room, a glass of wine in his hand, staring into the fire. She sat across from him without ceremony. Alicia didn't run Andrew. She was afraid of something or someone. He looked at her, and in his eyes there was something new, guilt. I believe that too, he said quietly. Then why didn't you say anything? Andrew rubbed his face, exhausted. Finally, he spoke. Because I couldn't prove it. And if I said it out loud, I'd be dragging Lucy into a hell I've barely kept her out of. He told her what he'd never told anyone. In the days before Alicia vanished, she had gotten into several phone arguments, always stepping outside to talk, always locking the doors after. Once she showed up with a small cut on her arm, said she fell. Andrew didn't believe her, but Alicia had been stubborn, private. She refused to say more. 3 days later she was gone. No forced entry, no note, no activity on her bank account. The police closed the case, called it a voluntary disappearance. Andrew said bitterly, but I knew her. She would never leave Lucy behind. Claire sat in silence. It all made sense, and yet, something was still missing. A piece she couldn't see. But Lucy kept drawing. A piece locked away in the greenhouse. Alicia used to spend hours in. A place Andrew hadn't opened since. We need to go in there. Andrew hesitated. I haven't touched that place since the day she left. Then it's time. That night, they walked together toward the greenhouse. The lock creaked like it was resisting time itself. Inside, the air was thick with dried pollen, damp wood, and memory. In the far corner, under a dusty sheet, they found a small metal box. Inside, a torn photograph. Alicia and a man. Claire recognized the location immediately. It was the train station, the place where she and Alicia had met, all those years ago. But the man's face, it had been partially burned, as if someone had tried to erase his identity. Andrew furrowed his brow. He's not from this city, he murmured. But I swear I've seen him before. Then Claire noticed something even more disturbing. On the back of the photo, a phone number, handwritten, and a symbol, a circle, with 3 crossed lines. The same one that had appeared again and again in Lucy's drawings, hidden in the trees, the doors, even in the eyes of the shadowy men. Someone, or something, was closer than they had ever imagined, and Alicia, even in her absence, was screaming for someone to finally listen. Claire spent the rest of the night, staring at the photograph, the burned half of a face that refused to fade from her mind. Even damaged, the man's expression lingered. It was a smile, but the eyes didn't smile. They watched, cold, calculated, like someone who always knew more than he ever said. The symbol on the back of the photo, the circle, with 3 intersecting lines, wouldn't leave her alone. Claire had seen it before, but couldn't remember where. She searched online, forums, image archives, conspiracy threads, and then she found it, buried deep within obscure documents and whispers of forgotten scandals. The symbol had appeared in the internal files of a long-defunct non-profit, accused of human trafficking and psychological coercion of vulnerable women. The name, Nova Terra Institute. Nothing official, just rumors, speculation, buried under layers of institutional silence. When Claire showed her findings to Andrew, he went pale. Alicia worked there, he said hoarsely. Just for a short while. But, she never spoke about it.
He paused, swallowing hard.
The last time I saw that symbol was on a note she threw into the fireplace. That afternoon, Claire went looking for a name she had found scribbled in the back of Alicia's notebook, hidden deep in the greenhouse box. Sophia Lane, psychologist. The last number Alicia had written down, with no explanation. Claire called. She introduced herself cautiously, skipping details, only mentioning Alicia's name. On the other end, silence. Then a whisper, urgent and full of fear. Don't call me again, and stay away from that house. It's not safe. The call dropped. Claire stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ears. What she felt wasn't paranoia, it was something sharper, more precise. A warning, a very real fear. That evening, as she was heading out for a walk with Lucy, she noticed something strange. The mailbox on the front gate was slightly ajar. Inside, a brown envelope. No return address. It was addressed to Andrew. One word written across the front in thick red marker. Silence. Andrew stared at it for a long time. Didn't move. Didn't speak. Then, without opening it, he threw it into the fire. It's a threat, he said quietly.
What's like before?
Before, he nodded, eyes darkening. In the weeks before Alicia disappeared, we got letters like this. Always the same word. No names, no signatures. And every time we tried to ask questions, something strange would happen. A disconnected security camera, an anonymous phone call, a broken light, a cracked window, small things, but enough to scare anyone into silence. Claire stared at him. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because I was scared, he said, and because, if I spoke out, they'd take Lucy from me. In that moment, they both understood something neither had dared say out loud, that the silence they had clung to for protection had become a prison, and that Alicia, whatever her fate, might have been just the first to pay the price for trying to break free. Across the street, beneath the shadow of a dying tree, a parked car sat in silence. Inside, someone watched the house and took notes. Claire didn't sleep that night. The name Sophia Lane circled her mind like a storm that wouldn't lift. It was obvious now. The woman knew more than she said, and it was just as obvious that she was terrified. But Sophia's fear only made Claire more certain. Alicia hadn't simply disappeared, she had been silenced, and Lucy might be next. The next morning, before Andrew woke, Claire left a single handwritten note on the kitchen counter. I need to know the truth. I'll explain everything when I get back. She took a train to the neighboring city, the one listed in Alicia's old agenda, where Sophia Lane used to work. The office was tucked into a quiet street, unmarked, inside an aging brick building. Claire rang the buzzer, uncertain if anyone would answer. Minutes passed. Silence. Then the door opened. Sophia wasn't what Claire expected. She wasn't frail. She wasn't timid. She was a woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed, short hair, and a face marked by equal parts exhaustion and clarity. Before Claire could say a word, Sophia spoke. I told you not to call me, but you're here, so come in. The office was filled with plants and books, a sanctuary for disturbed minds, but also a place where secrets lived. Sophia poured tea, sat across from Claire, took a long breath. You have no idea what you're stepping into, she said flatly. Maybe not, Claire replied. But Alicia knew me. She left me a letter, and her daughter is in danger. Sophia's brow furrowed. Lucy? She's alive. Claire froze. What do you mean? Sophia ran a hand over her face, like brushing away dust from an old memory. When Alicia came to see me, more than a year ago, she was desperate. She told me about an organization, Nova Terra Institute, where she'd briefly worked. At first it looked legitimate, helping women, emotional support, but she quickly realized it was something else. Manipulation, threats, trafficking. Not just people, but information, systems, power, control. She had no solid proof, just fragments, but she knew she was being watched. Claire's fists clenched in her lap. And Lucy? Sophia let out a long sigh. Alicia believed the institute wouldn't let her go so easily. She said Lucy was important, that the child was part of something Alicia didn't fully understand, but they wanted her. What she represented. Claire's chest tightened. Represented. Sophia nodded. Alicia spoke of a program, genetic records, hidden tests. She believed something had been done to her, without her consent, while she worked there. Something connected to Lucy. But before she could tell me everything, she vanished. And ever since, I've stayed quiet. The room filled with silence. Not fear, but resignation. Claire finally whispered. Then why tell me now? Sophia looked her in the eye. Because if you're here, and that child is still alive, there's no more hiding. Someone needs to know what's coming. Claire left the office with the world spinning around her. On the train ride back, her breathing came shallow. She had to see Lucy. She had to protect her. But when she got back to the house, something was wrong. The gate was cracked open. The front door, the strange off-key melody, played from the piano inside. Dissonant. And Lucy was nowhere. On the dining table, a white envelope. Same handwriting as before, but this time, it didn't say silence. It said only too late. Claire read the note over and over, trying to convince herself it was some kind of cruel joke. But it wasn't. The emptiness inside the house confirmed it. Lucy was gone, and so was Andrew. The word written in cold red ink, too late, felt final. Like a sentence, a seal. She raced upstairs, shouting their names, room by room. Nothing. No signs of struggle. No broken windows. Only silence. A silence that screamed. In the library, something stopped her cold. The metal box from the greenhouse was out of place. Inside it, only one document remained. A medical file, partially torn, bearing Lucy's name and the Nova Terra Institute logo. Dated 2 years earlier. It was true. They had touched her. From the very beginning, Claire grabbed her phone, called Sophia, straight to voicemail. She had no one left to turn to. Then, she remembered the train station, the place where she had once met Alicia, where the photo had been taken. Maybe, just maybe, there was something there. She took a taxi. The station looked ordinary, almost boring, but something told her to check the old bulletin board, tattered flyers, torn paper, faded ink, and then a white envelope, pinned with a rusty tack. In the bottom corner, the hand-drawn symbol, a circle with 3 intersecting lines. Inside, a single sheet of paper. If you want to see her again, come alone. Tell no one. You have 40 minutes. An address was written below. Claire hesitated, but she had no choice. She ran to the nearest taxi stand, showed the driver the address. It led her to the city's industrial zone, a stretch of rusted warehouses that whispered of things that should never have happened. She stepped inside. Darkness.
Alls.
Echoes of footsteps. Dust. The creak of old metal. Then, a dim light. Claire followed it. In the center of the warehouse, a chair. Lucy sat bound to it. Alive. Her eyes widened when she saw Claire. She rushed forward, but a voice stopped her cold. "I told you, you were too late." She turned. The man from the photo, now fully visible, the scar, the dead eyes. He wasn't alone. 2 other men stood blocking the exit. "Alicia ruined the project," he said, stepping closer. "You won't do the same." But Claire was not Alicia. She wasn't afraid anymore. And this time, she wasn't alone. Outside, the sound of sirens cut through the night. Moments earlier, Claire had done what Alicia never got the chance to do. She had sent her location, a silent alert. Just in case, someone out there still believed her. And for once, time was on her side. Police stormed the warehouse. Shouts, chaos. Lucy was freed. The men, arrested. And Claire fell to her knees, arms around the child, finally able to breathe. Days later, Andrew returned. He had been taken in for questioning, but he was free. He said nothing, just pulled Claire into an embrace. The scars would remain, but now, with truth on their side, they could begin to heal. The institute was investigated, its members exposed, documents leaked to the press. Alicia was never found. But they knew now. She hadn't run. She had fought. Claire stayed in the house with Lucy. Little by little, the girl began to speak again. Her drawings changed. No more shadows. No more crying figures. Now she painted open flowers, blue skies, and hands holding hands, without fear. And at the same park bench where it had all begun, Claire sometimes returned. Not to cry, but to remember. Because sometimes, one question changes everything. What would you do if no one were watching? Now Claire knew the answer. She would fight, she would love, and she would never ever stay silent again.